I wanted to have a panel that really talks about creative. It's central to where health marketing is heading. You're talking to consumers and engaging with them on very different grounds than you ever did before. And I think as we've already seen with examples that Veronica showed us yesterday and Michael, and we've also seen, I think, throughout from other presentations and talks, that the creative part of this industry is really changing very radically in some ways. And we're really seeing some very fresh and daring stuff come out. And I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to talk about where it's headed, whether there are any rules of thumb that are emerging now as we move from old cliches and engage in new themes. I wanted, though, and you know Veronica, you met Veronica, but let's let everybody else introduce themselves. Go ahead.
Do you want to reintroduce yourself, Veronica?
Veronica.
Okay, Veronica.
WestDerm.
All right.
Hello, everyone. Hello again.
Amanda DeVito. So I'm from Butler Till. You heard my colleague probably speak on day one, Scott. So thank you, Scott, by the way, for joining me. And yeah, we're a media firm, but I love talking about creative and content because they have to work in lockstep to actually drive impact. So I picked some things. One thing that we did a couple years back, but also I found one in particular that I was in love with by FCB, which I think we have some ex-FCBers here, which is pretty cool.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jeanne Jennings, SVP Media Lead at McCann Health Engagement. And like Amanda, I get excited about creative too, although I am a media person. And so I'm excited to be here to talk about how the healthcare industry is kind of shaking up some creative that's going out there in the world, right?
So I'm going to give you a little historical context and maybe make you feel better that no matter how bad health marketing is, it used to be a lot worse. So here, let me bring up the first slide. Whoop. Okay. This is an actual ad, if you can read it. This is an actual ad promoting cigarettes as an asthma treatment from the late 19th, early 20th century. No kidding. Dr. Patties. And this, of course, was the way that cigarette companies, Chesterfield in particular, throughout the 30s, 40s, and 50s, leveraged doctors and celebrities, plus what they claimed was health research to remind people that no, what you're hearing is all wrong. And that this is and that cigarettes actually are something that are smoother and cooler, and in some cases have health benefits. Anybody, special points? Anybody can identify that celebrity? This is a deep dive. No trivia, no media trivia nuts. Arthur Godfrey. Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts. He was the original Ed McMahon. He in the 30s, 40s, 50s had a radio and then a TV show that featured amateur talent. Anyway, but enough of that. But a little contextualization of how far we've come and where we used to be. But let me start with Veronica, because you showed us some of the stuff. I think maybe some of the more creative stuff that you were doing yesterday. But you're also we're changing around your brand parameters and your brand guidelines, and you're going to share that with us now. So tell us what we're seeing.
So after the success of our skin cancer campaign, which I highlighted yesterday, we obviously took a major jump in our approach in terms of imagery. We, in years past, have really taken that traditional route in terms of our imagery, where we are highlighting our patients in really kind of sterile medical environments, which was our clinics, and like many medical clinics, just to kind of show what the experience was like coming into our clinics. But then we realized that's not really the experience coming into our clinics. Our clinics are warm, they're inviting, our providers are very friendly, they're smiley, and especially when it comes to healthcare, like I said yesterday, we don't want to be scaring them away. And so we really wanted to kind of switch up our guidelines after we saw the success of our skin cancer campaign, where we were highlighting our patients outdoors, because that's realistically where our patients are today, especially in our regions of like the Southwest. They're at the beach, they're hiking, they're on the boat, they're A lot of our providers are big in the cycling community, and so we really wanted to highlight that side of the lifestyle that our patients are currently living. And so that's why we decided after our skin cancer campaign, which was in May, that we were going to make sure that this was in our brand guidelines. And we're also kind of in the midst of a rebrand. So it was really good timing. But this was just an update that we made just a few weeks ago after seeing the success of the campaign.
So let me ask you, and all of you please chime in, because it's a big theme right now. When we start moving from sort of the authoritative healthcare, the sort of the top-down vision of creative for healthcare, which is doctors, clinicians, expertise, put yourself in our hands. We'll take care of this. We know you're scared. To shiny, happy people living lifestyles. How are we reframing all of this? What's important about that? And I'm also curious, are we just replacing one set of cliches with another set of cliches?
I think, this was also spoken about yesterday a little bit from other speakers as well, but we want to give the power back to our patients and allow them to have that decision making and be a part of that process themselves. So rather than, our imagery reflecting, the providers being in that position, which they have been in years past, as they should be, we also want to give a little bit of the power back to our patients. And so I think there have been the cliches where, the providers are in that power and the imagery really reflects that. But I guess we are kind of swapping the cliches a little bit. But I don't know if cliche is really the right term. I still think that the imagery can reflect, how we want to give the patients back that power a little bit and be a part of that decision making.
Yeah, I agree. I think I don't know if it's the right word either. There's a part of me that thinks, of course, we're swapping cliches, right? But we're also changing out truths. And to some degree, this right now is a truth and a current truth that this outdoor, your skincare from going inside in a sterile environment, this is living your life empowered and feeling good about it. And I think that really is, probably the hardest part of creative is trying to find the human truths in all this and ensuring that you're staying on top of things so that the cliche doesn't become noise. And that's a hard balance between the two. So I think the answer is, yeah, we're probably swapping out cliches to some degree, but I actually think this is the current new truth that we're experiencing.
It does flip the scripts a little bit too, also on focusing. I think Michael spoke to this yesterday. It focuses on outcomes rather than process. It's taking the focus away from the thing people are afraid of to where what this is enabling you to do.
Yeah, and I think evolving is a good word because we've all been through so much the last couple years with COVID and the pandemic and quarantine and things that none of us have really lived through. And it's really changed our lives and the process that we're all kind of used to. So I think evolving is a good word. We're evolving from the traditional, what everyone's been used to in the past, and evolving into what life is like today.
When you make changes like this, do you have any metrics you're putting against it? Do you know whether it's working?
We're basing it off of our recent campaign where we saw a 22% increase in booked appointments from our previous record, which was the last year's skin cancer campaign. Skin Cancer Month is a big one for us. That's really our biggest campaign of the year for very obvious reasons. So when we saw that jump, we knew that the only kind of change that we did in our messaging was this new type of imagery that we were presenting. And so we're attributing it to that. And again, May just happened, so it's a very recent change for us. So we're still kind of testing, but we're basing it off of that recent campaign and the success.
And it's inclusive too. It looks, it just reflects our times now. And it used to be they would focus only on a set of models,
which is a
right?
good segue to Amanda's to the ad that Amanda highlighted. Which this ad that we're going to see from Janssen. Set it up a little bit for us. This is not your agency wasn't doing this.
No.
You simply picked this out as a really good example.
Yeah, I picked this out for a couple reasons, and like I said, I think we have an XFC beer right here. So what I love about this is, one, I think as marketers, especially in this space, we have an incredible privilege and responsibility to destigmatize, to see things where patients that feel invisible and aren't seen and heard are brought to the forefront in a real graceful way. And so this Janssen Pharmaceuticals has a long-lasting injection for schizophrenic patients. And unfortunately, with schizophrenia, you can have these episodes, and these episodes literally just derail your life. And there's enough episodes that, like I said, it's derailing. And unfortunately, what happens is you have these patients that feel like they're on the right track, and then everything just goes bad. And so what I love about this, two things. One, the imagery. So it's almost like this graphic novel-looking imagery, and it's very kind of dark in the beginning, which is meant to be that way, because if you are in the middle of an episode, you feel dark, you feel heavy, and then it lightens up as they're realizing that there is a light at the end of this tunnel. What's also great is there's a narrative that's overlaid by this with an actual story from someone that has been dealing with this episode. So you're going to hear an actual story. And then lastly, the two women were at the forefront of this creative. And there's a big gender gap between creatives. There was 3% years ago. We're now at 11% of creative directors being women. And I think it's really powerful. You correlate that to some degree with that 87% of worldwide purchases are done by women. So you kind of assume we're also making health decisions, which I think is really powerful. So that was one of the reasons. So you can take a look.
Do I hit it again?
It was the worst when I had a schizophrenia breakdown in Washington, D.C. I was running around for 3 days. I was lost in the subway. I was scared. I envisioned crowds yelling and screaming, wanting to get me. I saw my deceased father on the platform and heard his voice. I looked for him, but I couldn't find him. The train took me to the very last stop, and a police officer tried to help me. I was really out of it, and they ended up taking me in. I wanted help. I needed help. I just wasn't getting the right treatment at first. People weren't listening to me, and that was so frustrating. I was in and out of the hospital, and I was tired. I was tired of being tired. Hearing about injections was new to me, and I wanted to try something different. Before, I was really in the dark. With my schizophrenia symptoms controlled, I was finally able to stay out of the dark.
A once-monthly injection can help delay another episode. Could a change in treatment plan make the difference?
What I also like about that is communicating empathy and using these tools to communicate empathy in a different way from, I think, the way we see most well-meaning healthcare marketing, which is we feel your pain. And here it's really showing experience and sort of in visualizing it in a way that both the patient can understand, but I think also for those of us who don't know a damn thing about schizophrenia and probably still stigmatize it and stereotype it as street people issue, not everyday life issue. And I think that's the kind of creative that has a much deeper reach, because it not only is reaching the potential patient on a different level, but also reaching the rest of us on a different level. Let's move on, because there's another one that I want to move on to the public service announcement.
Okay, so in full transparency, the campaign public service announcement was done by another creative AOR, but what they decided is they needed our help to figure out how to give it a little bit of a longer tail effect, in particular in social. So our team got together and decided to look at kind of the macro environment and realize that the slang AF was quite popular. So anyone not familiar with, like, you are smart AF? Okay, I'm not gonna, I know we're streaming live, so I won't say it. Anyway, so we decided, okay, well, you know what are we gonna do? Let's kind of capitalize on this macro kind of cultural trend. And so you had this whole creative and then our messaging strategy of adding the hashtag healthy AF. And there's a lot of stigma around women's sexual health and talking about it. So we were really proud of this, but what's interesting, and I think it's on the next slide, so there was a lot of different concepts. I think one more, I'll show you one more here. Yeah. A lot of different concepts. And
oops.
which is kind of ironic
Oh,
what
no.
that looks
I'm
like,
sorry.
by the
Sorry,
way.
I've got to back up.
Anyone?
It's this one.
I did not cue that up, but I was like,
No.
huh. What do we have
But
here?
it foreshadows that we're going to get even better.
So anyway, segueing into that,
I'm
which
sorry.
is
We are.
really good.
I think we are missing the
No,
one
no
about-
worries. So it's basically these women that are, like, hi, I'm here, and there was some language around her box, and I'm looking at it, and I'm looking around the room, and it's all men that have created this, and I go, you guys, I love you guys. Have you talked to any other women about this? We don't call it a box. I'm like, we use grown-up words like vagina, and also some goofy words, but not box. So they're like, oh, yeah, okay. So, in all seriousness, I think that kind of segues into that many times we have to look around and think who is not being represented in the room. And I know it was well-intentioned, but it was funny at the time. And I'm sort of, either way, moving forward, they're like, who's not in the room? Mm-hmm. Who's not in the room? Who's not in the room? So both of those just really, obviously one that we capitalize on, but the other one, like I said, having the privilege, you mentioned inclusivity, but having the privilege to weave DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, into all of the creative and the thinking is now the current way of doing things. And I love it. And I think it is causing us to be more audacious and bold, and something that has to and should be happening in everything we do. So.
Veronica, Jeanne, would you chime in on this? Because I'm smart. I'm a guy, but I'm smart enough to know when to shut up. And I would like this whole idea of inclusivity, especially at the creative level, but also maybe, Jeanne, you could talk about it at the media level too, where it's important and where you start seeing it move the industry in positive, tangible, positive ways.
That's a really great question, because just this year, or this past year, we've had, meetings with kind of like collaborative, work sessions, and with our creative teams, and we've communicated. We've talked about, perhaps like for conditions that are hitting more, certain populations than others, maybe we use models that reflect the condition. It's no longer just affecting, I'm sorry to say, Caucasian people. It's like you have to move beyond that and think about what the condition is doing to the population and who it's, really hitting the most, and then maybe use models, or maybe even real people, real patients, who can communicate, what's going on when they are suffering from these conditions, and what they're doing to survive, or to just really like suffer through them.
Yeah, for us, it's a no-brainer. It's one of the lines in our guidelines. We are required, and we have to ensure that we're highlighting people of all races, all ages, because at the end of the day, everyone has skin, and skin health affects everyone, no matter how old you are or where you come from. So it's extremely important to us that we're ensuring that diversity is reflected in everything that we do.
Well, tell me, you guys reflect a little bit on the role of women in the industry right now, because one of the things I've observed in programming this event is when I did the head count of the editorial portion of this, there were only 4 of us dudes up here, and it was and I was one of them, is Scott, Danny, and Michael. And everyone else, this is one of those rare shows that we have. We have a couple of segments when we do an email marketing and others where the majority of speakers are women. Why is that so here? Is this a good sign?
We know our shit.
Is it having an impact? Yeah, well, I will tell you as a programmer, going back to the early days of programming digital shows, we had a standing policy at MediaPost, no boys club panels. So there always had to be some sort of equity on the panel, which was hard to do in the early days of programmatic, believe me. There were not a lot of women in the room. But I'm really curious about what that means. And as a programmer, I know that I always used to sorry, but I used to know that women were the best panelists, and I always knew they knew how to converse in a way that a lot of the men did not and tended to pontificate. But go ahead. But please tell me. Answer. Let me stop pontificating and answer. And
no, I was going to say that
question.
this is actually so great that we are having the inaugural, healthcare summit with MediaPost. It's something, you've had CPG summits, you've had all these things, and for the first time in 2022, we have a healthcare summit with MediaPost. So I think that's progress.
But is it making a difference? I mean, what I'm seeing, just say from the agenda and when I was programming, and that I was able, mainly women were stepping up to do this. And I'm really curious what that indicates about the industry, and if you're seeing places in your company where this matters.
I think so, and I think a lot of conversations that we're seeing on social media, even in the last couple years, and women's marches, I think it's at the forefront and at the top of conversation for many people. And so I think women have always had a place where we are, and it is exciting to see us stepping up more, I suppose. I don't know. I mean, I definitely challenged myself to come here and do what I did yesterday and today. So I think it's exciting, and it's definitely a challenge for me, but it's something that I feel like I've overcome, and I hope to do it more. So yeah.
Yeah, so we're a women-owned agency, but we lack in racial diversity. And so, we look around the room and we say, well, wait, who is not being represented in this room? But I think what we're realizing is, yes, gender gap, diversity is so important, but there's also more layers to it of intersectionalities, right? So you think about it's just a day in the life of women in general, or men, or anyone. You start off and you say, okay, I'm a mom. I wake up and I'm a puppy mom. I'm a wife. Then throughout the day, I might decide, you know what, I really want to put my businesswoman hat on. And so, right, there's all these intersectionalities that are all kind of colliding, and I love it. And that's the complication and the nuances that we have to grapple with, not only in creative, but in media. How does data segment things like that? Because we're complex versus just demo, right? Which is why I love all the behavioral targeting. So at the end of the day, I do see us collectively moving forward. And I also see incredibly great men in power and positions that help us kind of pull us up or lead the way. And I think that is something that is a necessity for us to move everything forward.
Mm-hmm. Who also don't believe that they know what to call a vagina,
Right.
which I think is
Right.
That's such a great anecdote.
Right.
Though that's such a great anecdote of how this works, of how inclusion changes things. Well-meaning men who think they're doing the right thing, and in the end they're getting it wrong.
Yeah.
But
very excited over it.
But the other part of this, and I think you mentioned it briefly, is candor. Is that one of the things that having more women in the industry is doing, and also this move towards consumerization of healthcare, is we have to stop using the euphemisms. And a lot of the ads that we're looking at already are dispensing with the euphemisms. We didn't say cervix in an ad too often either, let alone let it become sort of a play on words. But we're ready to do that, and to some degree, women are insisting, look, we have to stop using euphemisms around all of this stuff if we're really going to be serious about it. Yeah. So actually, I think our next ad is a perfect example of this. So should we show it first, or do you want to tee it up, Jeanne?
I can.
Also apropos, I believe.
Is that your ad or my ad?
I think this is your. I think
I'll
this
set
is
it
your.
up.
This is
Yeah.
the Fexi. This is the
So thank you for talking about setting euphemisms up. Okay. So I know it's only around 9 o'clock in the morning, and I'm about to present to you an ad for Fexi, which is a birth control product, and on-demand. It's first of its kind, hormone-free. The ad you're about to see was a product of our colleagues at McCann Health, New Jersey, and it's actually an all-women team. And we were proud to be the media agency that activated this. So this takes place, ready for this, in a vagina. And if you're familiar with Annie Murphy, who played Alexis Rose on Schitt's Creek, she is the spokesperson, and you'll see her world. It's her house, it's her rules, and when we say her house, it means her vagina. So without further ado, let's play it.
Welcome to my vagina. In here, I make the rules. Rule number 1, keep it real, hun. And that means no hormones, because hormones just weren't right for me. And since my number 2 rule is no parties without protection, I use Phexxi, a revolutionary hormone-free birth control gel. It's localized and it works naturally with my body. Oh, and did I mention that it is birth control without hormones? But wait, it gets better. Phexxi is also used in the moment, so I only have to use it when I'm planning on having company. Rare but serious side effects include bladder or kidney infection. Contact a healthcare provider if severe or prolonged genital irritation or other urinary tract symptoms occur. Avoid Phexxi if allergic to its ingredients. So when it comes to your vagina, make sure your rules include hormone-free Phexxi. Coming!
All right.
I love it. I'm not sure I should talk about it.
I
This is the kind of thing. I mean, we're doing it. We're talking about it. There
are a lot of I'm hearing yeses from out here. A lot of people are in agreement.
Did we offend anybody in the room? I want to just see
some.
some.
Why this is resonating. So I better understand why this is working, and maybe we can get from this some rules of thumb.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
I mean, we feel very. We're proud of this work, but also because it's authentic, it's real, it's talking about the body parts that, that we don't mention at all, ever, like in the public setting. Like we talk about our eyes without blinking, and we talk about our elbows and our knees. Why can't we talk about our vaginas? Like this is this is birth control, so naturally, it affects women and it affects vaginas. So, and especially, with what's happening in our country these days, I think it's more important than ever to talk about, our sexual health and our sexual wellness, and talk about the body parts that they affect.
Well, I think, when I look at this also, I think the candor of a thing that we've tended to avoid is connecting actual sexuality with the products. That what we're saying here is this frees you up to have the sex life you want to have, and we've been hesitant to do that because of a whole host of stereotypes and taboos around female sexuality, and this seems to me one of those ads that really confronts it very directly and says enough of this. We are talking about women being having control over their own sexual lives and not being afraid to express their sexuality. And I think that a lot of reproductive health advertising tried to still cleave those two worlds. They didn't want them. They were shy about putting them together.
It also uses humor, which is so relatable and also kind of like a new cliche approach to healthcare marketing. For so long, healthcare has been such a tight-knit, very regulated topic, and I'm finding that so many more healthcare brands and companies are starting to tie in a little bit of humor, which kind of lightens the mood a little bit and makes it less taboo and scary to talk about. And I think this is a perfect
And we've seen that
example
in
of
a few examples. We saw it in the
Right.
public service announcement. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so on brand with her as an actress. I mean, you already have a connection to her. It's familiar. So hearing the message and the language through her is really a brilliant approach. It catches you a bit off guard because it's her, right? It's Alexis. Was that her name? Alexis?
Well, Welcome to My Vagina is about as good an opening line
right.
as you're going to have.
Right. Hello.
Jeanne, well, tell us about the media plan. Was there any media pushback from any outlets? What kind of plan did you put against this, and did you have to take any of that into consideration?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you've all seen it on, linear TV, cable, and really just programming that is targeted to women. There was pushback, actually. Like, I think some of the networks didn't want to use the word vagina before 10 p.m., so they had to use, the word domain, like welcome to my domain.
Really? Wow.
Which is a good alternative, I think.
Better than box, I guess.
So much better than box. It's not a box. But yeah, so yeah, that was, pushback. But I think for the most part, it was, well accepted, and it's really well received, but yeah, that was the only pushback we thought.
I wanted to segue from that into a piece that I'm going to add into it because it involves an interview that I did 2 weeks ago with the CMO of Bayer, Patricia Corsi, about, I don't know if have any of you heard of the Vagina Academy campaign? It's going on internationally right now. It started in Brazil. It's now going over in the UK. It's being highly localized, so it changes as it goes around. But basically, it's trying to talk about feminine hygiene in cultures where there have been quite strong taboos. In fact, you were not allowed to use the word vagina in advertising in Brazil. Even the social networks prohibited it until Bayer came in and negotiated being able to use it and negotiated ways in which they could run some of this media. But this is a really good example, I think, of some of the themes that we've been talking about, but also doing it in a way that really had a tremendous social impact. I mean, they were really addressing some severe taboos within Brazilian culture and negotiating with the media companies to allow them to break some of these taboos.
Aren't learning what they need to know about their bodies, and Brazil's abstinence-only sex education is making things much, much worse. They're not learning that vaginas are complex ecosystems prone to common infections like thrush and bacterial vaginosis, or that sweat, hair, labia big and small are normal, or that they're not supposed to smell like mangoes. And what we don't know can hurt us. Misinformation replaces real information, so when something goes wrong in our pants, we feel ashamed. Too ashamed to get the treatment we need. So Caniston staged an intervention. Welcome to Intensivao da Pepeca. That's Vagina High to non-Portuguese speakers. It's the shame-free school of intimate health on TikTok, and it's giving young people the vital vagina education they're not getting anywhere else. Our teachers are fun, knowledgeable, and relatable TikTok creators who have the real facts and aren't afraid to spread them. Head teacher Claudia Milan, a qualified pelvic physiotherapist, can teach you all about good and bad bacteria in biology, the color spectrum of discharge in art, and how common infections really are in statistics. Oh, and she can demystify the pH scale for you in chemistry class too, while dressed as a giant vulva, naturally. Claudia is joined by qualified psychologist McCann and body positive activist Hannah Khalil for myth-busting, shame-beating lessons in everything from sociology to fashion. Of course, Intensivao da Pepeca has its star students too. We enrolled young creators to learn alongside our audience so they could see people like them talking in a shame-free way about their amazing vaginas. And the whole class of 21 were invited to take part in a final exam to test their newfound knowledge. The results? 43 million views and counting, and so far, 210,000 Brazilians have enrolled. That's 17,000 real-life classrooms of young people who now know what's up down there.
Yeah, it was an amazing piece of work, especially the ways in which they used influencers to do a lot of this, to drive a lot of this, and they're taking it on the road. They're literally bringing it globally and taking it to a variety of different markets. But it seemed to me this is a really good example to me, as I was talking to Patricia, of the healthcare industry really having the opportunity to make serious social impact. I mean, we're at a moment where accurate and candid health information is absolutely indispensable. I mean, it has real social and political implications. And this is really one of those great examples of daring to do it. I want to wrap here by asking if there are any creative rules of thumb that are emerging as we start moving into, these next good cliches. lifestyle cliches, or other ways of coming at creative. Are there rules of thumb to a new generation and better creative?
I think shame-free was the word that stuck out to me during that campaign, and I think that's kind of the approach that we're trying to take too. There is no shame in that or those types of conditions. There's no shame in the fact that, you know, you used to lay out in the sun with baby oil. There's no shame around healthcare and whatever type of condition anyone may be suffering with. And so I think if that's being reflected in the creative, we're opening up those conversations. And I think if there's one thing I've learned this whole weekend from all the speakers and watching things like that, it's that there's no shame, you know, no matter what you're going through and what you're suffering with, I think it's okay. And we should be continuing the conversations around it.
I just have to say this is the best event ever because I'm going to go home and they're going to say, "What'd you learn?" And I'm going to say, "There's no shame in my vagina game." So I would say that it's just recognizing your privilege and the responsibility that we have as marketers. And we know, I mean, Addie, I think we were talking, there's massive constraints in pharma, but being able to bring in legal, bring in compliance, make them part of the conversation because you need to. And I think you also then bring in your creative companies and think through how can they help you sort of push some of these thoughts and constructs forward. So I definitely just recognizing your privilege and the responsibility that we have, which is really powerful and exciting. And you look at that, we're already starting to change the narrative on these, and that we should be very proud of that as marketers.
I mean, I agree with, you know, there's no shame, right? And also, I think we don't have to push buttons just for the sake of pushing buttons. Like, there has to be intention. Like, what is it for? And, you know, and you know, it helps when it's humorous too, but really we need to address the conditions, you know, without mincing words, you know, and really being authentic and addressing things, you know, in reality, the way they should be. It's not, you know, we're no longer living in, like, you know, we don't have to idealize, you know, we have to think about what's happening around us. And I think during the pandemic, that all, you know, just came to the surface. And so we need to change the way we think about creative and how, you know, we should move forward.
Yeah, we used the adage the other day, our main competition is fear. Our main competition is shame as well, I think, for a lot of this, for healthcare generally. So thank you so much. This was great. I really appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.